It's swelling so fast. The maid lifted her skirt and did something the billionaire could not imagine. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let us go back to our main character. Rain hammered against the glass walls of the Harrington estate that night. The storm had rolled in from the Texas plains without warning, turning the long driveway into a river of silver light. Inside, the house was quiet, too quiet for a place so large. Only the soft ticking of a grandfather clock echoed through the marble hall. Grace Miller moved carefully down the hallway, the hem of her black maid uniform brushing the polished floor. Her hands trembled around a small tray of clean towels, a bowl of ice, a bottle of antiseptic. She had been told not to disturb the master unless absolutely necessary, but tonight she had been assigned to check on him. The bedroom door stood half open, spilling a faint golden light. She took a breath and stepped inside. Cole Harrington, the billionaire who owned half the tech startups in Dallas, lay on the bed. His right leg was elevated, wrapped in layers of white gauze from a recent surgery. The air smelled faintly of medicine and rain-soaked wood. "Mr. Harrington," she said softly, setting the tray down. "It is time to change your compress." He did not answer. His eyes were closed, jaw clenched tight. Grace hesitated, unsure if he was asleep or pretending to be. She had heard the stories how he had fired an entire staff for entering his room uninvited. But when she stepped closer, she saw the sheen of sweat on his forehead and the tension in his hands. Something was wrong. Then his voice, low and rough, broke the silence. "It's swelling so fast." Grace froze. The area around the bandage looked red, almost glowing beneath the gauze. The skin was stretching, hot to the touch. Her heart started racing. She reached for the phone on the nightstand, but there was no signal. The storm had knocked out the lines. She tried calling the private doctor on her cell, but all she got was a busy tone. Rain pounded harder outside, thunder shaking the windows. Cole groaned, his breath shallow, his face twisting in pain. She whispered to herself, oh no, this is bad." The swelling was moving up fast. Every second counted. Grace remembered the first rule her grandmother had taught her: when help cannot come, you become the help. She looked around the room for clean fabric, for anything to use as a bandage, but the supply cabinet was locked. Her eyes dropped to her own uniform, the long skirt that brushed the floor. If she did nothing, the pressure might cut off circulation. If she acted, she might lose her job. But watching him gasp in pain, she knew she had no choice. Grace took a deep breath, grabbed the edge of her skirt and tore it. The sound of fabric ripping filled the room. She ripped again, harder this time, until she had a long strip of cloth. She folded it, pressed it gently around his leg, just above the swelling, and secured a bag of ice on top. "Hold on, please," she murmured. "Just breathe, Mr. Harrington. I am here." He looked at her, half dazed, half stunned, as if he could not believe what she was doing. Her face was flushed, her hands trembling but steady. Every motion was careful, practical, desperate. Minutes stretched like hours. The beeping from the heart monitor steadied again. The swelling stopped climbing. Grace pressed her palm to her chest, relief flooding through her. Cole's breathing slowed, and his eyes, those cold, unreadable eyes, softened for the first time. The storm raged on outside, lightning spilling white across the room. Grace sat on the floor beside the bed, her skirt torn, her arms streaked with melted ice water. She whispered, more to herself than to him, "I guess you never know who will save you when no one else can." Cole looked down at her, his voice hoarse but sincere. "You just did." And for the first time since the accident, the walls of the Harrington mansion no longer felt quite so cold. The next morning, sunlight slipped through the tall windows of the Harrington mansion. The storm had passed, but the house still felt heavy, like it was holding its breath after what happened the night before. Grace woke up early, her body sore from sleeping in the small room near the laundry hall. She looked at her uniform hanging by the door, the hem torn where she had ripped the fabric. The memory of that night came back in fragments, the heat under her palms, the sound of his voice, the way the swelling finally stopped. She had not meant to cross any lines, but she knew she would have done the same thing again. Downstairs, the older housekeeper, Mrs. Porter, was waiting at the counter with a pot of coffee. "You look pale, dear." Did you sleep at all? Grace shook her head. Not really. How is he? Mrs. Porter sighed. Still resting. The doctor came at dawn. He said what you did probably saved him from something much worse. The swelling has gone down. Grace exhaled, finally letting her shoulders drop. But Mrs. Porter gave her a knowing look. Mr. Harrington does not like surprises. Be prepared. He might not thank you for what you did. Later that morning, Grace carried a fresh tray upstairs breakfast, new medicine, and a small vase of daisies from the kitchen garden. When she pushed the door open, Cole was sitting up, his leg propped on pillows, reading something on his tablet. The light caught the sharp lines of his face, but his expression was unreadable. She placed the tray down quietly. Your breakfast, sir. He looked at her, voice even. You stayed the whole night? Yes, sir. The doctor could not be reached. He interrupted. You tore your uniform. Grace froze. I did what I had to do. I will replace it. There was a long pause. Then, to her surprise, he said, No need. I told the staff to order a new set. You acted fast. That was commendable. His tone was distant, almost clinical, but the words made her blink. A compliment from Cole Harrington was like rain in the desert. Thank you, sir, she said softly. He nodded once, then turned his eyes to the window. You can go. Grace left quietly, but her heart beat faster than it should have. It was not the compliment itself, it was that for the first time she had seen something human behind the walls he built around himself. Days passed. Cole's recovery continued, slow but steady. The doctor adjusted his therapy schedule and praised the care log that Grace kept so neatly on the bedside table. She wrote down every temperature, every pulse, even the smallest signs of discomfort. Sometimes, when Cole could not sleep, she would read aloud in a calm voice short news pieces or stories from the local paper. One evening she found him awake, staring at the ceiling. Do you want me to read, sir? She asked. No, talk. Tell me something real. Grace hesitated. About what? About you. She told him about her mother, who had a weak heart but still laughed at game shows on television. About her younger brother working nights at a grocery store to help pay rent. About growing up in a small town where everyone looked after everyone else because no one could afford not to. Cole listened in silence. He did not interrupt. When she finished, he said quietly, So you took this job because of the medical bills? Yes. I did not plan to stay this long, but... She glanced at his leg. Life had other plans. His lips curved slightly. Life usually does. That night, when she left the room, he watched her go. For the first time since his accident, he realized that the sound of her footsteps in the hallway made the house feel alive. A week later, during one of his early therapy sessions, the physical therapist failed to show up on time. Cole was restless, frustrated with his slow progress. I can manage without him, he said, reaching for the metal walker beside the bed. Grace stepped forward. You should not try alone. He gave her a dry smile. Then stand close, in case I fall. He stood, unsteady but determined. Grace held her breath as he took one step, then another. His muscles trembled with effort, sweat shining on his forehead. When he faltered, she caught his arm. For a moment, their eyes met his filled with pain and pride, hers with quiet steadiness. You see? He murmured. Still alive. Barely, she whispered back. A nervous laugh slipping through, he smiled an actual human smile. It was brief, but it changed everything. That evening, Grace wrote her usual notes in the care log, but she added one extra line. Patient smiled for the first time since I arrived. Outside, the sky glowed orange over the Texas hills. The storm had passed days ago, but inside the mansion, something else was beginning to heal. The summer heat settled heavy over the Harrington estate. The air smelled of cut grass and lemon polish, and through the tall windows the world outside looked calm, almost perfect. Inside, however, everything still revolved around a quiet rhythm, the careful schedule of recovery that Grace followed every day. By now, she knew the house better than anyone. She knew which floorboards creaked near the study, which medicine cabinet held the sterile gauze, and exactly how long it took for the old elevator to reach the second floor. Every morning, she would knock softly, push open the door, and find Cole Harrington already awake, reading reports or pretending not to watch her work. Their conversations had grown longer. He still spoke with precision, but now there was warmth behind his tone. Grace had learned that when he looked away mid-sentence, it meant he was thinking about something painful. When he cleared his throat before speaking, it meant he was trying not to sound too soft. One afternoon, as she adjusted the strap of his brace, he asked quietly, "Do you ever regret taking this job?" Grace looked up, surprised. "No, I am learning more here than I ever did anywhere else." "Learning what?" She smiled faintly. "Patience, responsibility, and that some people only act cold because they have been hurt." He did not respond, but she saw the way his jaw tightened. A shadow crossed his face, quick but deep. Later that day, when she left the room, he stayed by the window for a long time. The truth was, he had not told anyone the full story of his accident. The newspapers had called it a tragic event, the result of bad weather and slick roads. But there had always been a small voice inside him, whispering that it had not been an accident at all. That night, he opened his laptop and pulled up the file he had avoided for weeks, the security footage from the night of the crash. Rain blurred the windshield, headlights cutting through the dark. Then, a flash of metal from another car behind him. He paused the video before impact. His hands trembled slightly. He shut the laptop. Not yet. The next morning, the air was thick with humidity. Grace came in with her usual calm smile and a pot of coffee. "Good morning, Mr. Harrington." He looked at her for a long moment before answering. "You can call me Cole." She blinked, unsure if she heard correctly. "Sir?" "Cole," he repeated. "You have earned that much." It was a small change, but to Grace, it felt monumental. From that moment on, the air between them shifted, still respectful, but warmer, easier to breathe. Every evening, she would write her observations in the notebook: temperature, swelling, medication times. But she also wrote something else in tiny letters, only she could read. "He is getting stronger." Not just his leg. Sometimes, when the pain returned, he refused to take more pills. Instead, he asked her to talk about her family, her small apartment, her dream of opening a care center for people who could not afford home nurses. He listened with quiet focus, as if her voice grounded him to something real. One afternoon, she found him standing near the piano in the living room, his cane resting beside him. "I did not know you played," she said. "I used to," he answered, tracing the keys. "My mother loved this song." He pressed a note, soft and uncertain. The sound wavered through the empty room. Grace hesitated, then stepped closer. "Keep going." He did. Slowly, the melody broken but sincere. When he stopped, she clapped her hands lightly. Not bad for a man who almost gave up walking. He laughed, a deep, genuine sound that filled the space between them. That night, as she finished tidying up, he said, "Grace, if you ever leave this job, what will you do next?" She thought for a moment. "I will start that care service I told you about. I want to help people who cannot afford what you have here." He nodded, something thoughtful in his gaze. "You should. The world needs more people who do what is right, even when it costs them." For a second, she thought she saw something like pride in his expression. Later, when she walked back to her small room, she paused by the stairwell and looked down the hallway that led to his door. She realized she was no longer just an employee working for a paycheck. Somewhere in the quiet hours of caring, cleaning, and listening, she had become part of his world, someone he trusted, maybe even needed. Upstairs, Cole sat by the window, watching the lights of the city flicker far beyond his gated walls. For the first time in months, he did not feel trapped. He whispered to himself, "Maybe healing does not come from medicine after all." In that moment, both of them, in their separate corners of the mansion, were unaware that the peace they had found would soon be tested, and that the truth about his accident, buried under silence and secrets, was waiting to surface. The days grew longer, and with them, the quiet rhythm of healing continued inside the Harrington estate. Cole's steps were steadier now. The cane that had once felt like a symbol of weakness had become a measure of his progress. Every morning, Grace would walk beside him through the garden paths, counting each step under the shade of oak trees. The house had changed too. The rooms were no longer silent. Sometimes, music played softly from the old piano, or the smell of fresh bread drifted from the kitchen where Grace liked to bake. Even Mrs. Porter began smiling again. But with recovery came restlessness. Cole was used to control his company, his life, his image. Now, confined to his home, he watched from a distance as others ran his business. One afternoon, he sat by the window with his laptop open, scrolling through reports. His eyes narrowed. Numbers had shifted. Accounts were moved. Someone had been making decisions in his absence. Grace entered with a tray of tea. "You look troubled," she said gently. "Do I?" He gave a faint smile, but his voice was tight. "It seems my brother has been handling more than I thought." She hesitated. The one who visited during your surgery? Yes, Ryan. He closed the laptop. He means well. At least I thought he did. There was something in his tone, a mix of anger and sadness. Grace wanted to ask more, but she knew the line between concern and intrusion. Still, she left a quiet note of reassurance in her voice. Sometimes, people surprise you in ways you do not expect. Not all of them are bad. That night, a soft knock echoed on Grace's door. It was Mrs. Porter, holding a small envelope. "This came for you, dear. No return address." Grace frowned, took it, and waited until she was alone. Inside was a single photo printed from a security camera. The image made her blood run cold. It showed her in Cole's bedroom on the night of the storm, her skirt torn, kneeling beside him. From that angle, the picture looked nothing like what had really happened. She stared at it in disbelief. A short note was scrawled on the back. "Does he know what you did?" Her hands shook. She felt sick. Who would send this? Why now? The next morning, she carried the photo to Cole's room, unsure whether to speak or stay silent. He was sitting by the window again, his legs stretched on the ottoman, a distant look in his eyes. She took a breath. "Mr. Harrington Cole, someone sent this to me." He looked at the photo. His face went still. For a moment, he said nothing. Then, slowly, he set it down. "Where did this come from?" "I do not know. It arrived last night. I swear I never—" "I know," he interrupted softly. "I know what happened that night." She blinked, startled. "You do?" He nodded, leaning back in his chair. "You saved me, Grace. I was awake long enough to remember. Whoever sent this is trying to stir something that does not exist." Relief flooded her chest, but confusion followed quickly. Why would anyone do that? Cole looked out the window again, his jaw tightening. Because power attracts envy, and envy sometimes comes from very close. Later that day, Grace found him in the study, his laptop open again, several screens displaying camera footage and account data. She stood by the door, hesitant. "Are you looking for something?" "Yes," he said quietly. "For answers." He showed her a file security access logs from the night of his accident. "There was a second car behind me. It was not random. And whoever sent that photo has the same access to my systems." Grace's pulse quickened. "You think it is your brother?" "I think I have been blind," he replied, "and I am done pretending." For the next few days, the house carried a different energy. The calm routine gave way to quiet urgency. Cole made phone calls, scheduled private meetings, and asked Grace to keep a close eye on any deliveries or messages. She noticed he spoke less, but his eyes burned with purpose. In the middle of one restless night, Grace brought him a cup of coffee. He looked exhausted, shoulders tense under the dim light. "You should rest," she said softly. He looked up, his expression softer now. "You still care, even when the world might think you should not." Quote. Grace met his gaze, steady. "Sometimes, caring is the only thing that makes sense." He held her eyes for a moment longer than usual. Then he whispered, almost to himself, "You remind me of what life is supposed to feel like." Outside, thunder rolled again over the Texas hills, faint but distant. This time Grace did not flinch. The first storm had brought fear. This one carried something different, a quiet strength between two people who had learned to trust each other. Neither of them knew that by the next morning, the secrets hidden in those camera files would force both of them to face what really happened the night of the crash, and what healing would truly cost. The morning light broke through the clouds, washing the Harrington estate in pale gold. Inside, the mood was anything but calm. Cole had barely slept. The truth he had uncovered from the files sat heavy in his chest like a stone. The accident had not been an accident at all. The data confirmed it. The car behind him that night had belonged to Ryan, his own brother. Grace entered quietly with breakfast, sensing the tension before a word was spoken. The air felt charged, the way it does right before a storm. "Good morning, Cole," she said carefully. "Did you rest at all?" He shook his head. "No, there is something I need to show you." He turned the laptop toward her. On the screen was the same security footage he had seen the night before. The image was grainy but clear enough, his car spinning, another vehicle's headlights flashing close behind. Grace covered her mouth. "Oh my God," she whispered. "That car was following you." "Yes," he said quietly. "And Ryan was behind the wheel. He made it look like an accident so he could take over the company while I recovered." Grace felt the floor tilt beneath her. "That is unthinkable." "Power makes people do unthinkable things," he said, voice low but steady. "But I will not let him destroy everything my father built or the people I care about. For a moment, his words hung in the air, heavier than the confession itself. Grace looked at him, realizing he had included her in that sentence. The people I care about. Cole leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. There is more. He accessed the camera feeds. He is the one who sent that photo of you. Her stomach twisted. To humiliate us both. Quote. To control the story before I could tell the truth, Cole said. But he made a mistake. He forgot that I still know how to fight. He reached for his phone. I am going to expose him. I am calling the board, the legal team, the media, if I have to. Grace hesitated. Cole, this will not just hurt him. It will hurt you too, are you sure? He looked at her, eyes fierce. Sometimes healing means tearing out what is poisoned, no matter how deep it goes. Hours later, the mansion filled with voices. Ryan arrived with 2 assistants, smiling like nothing had happened. Grace watched from the doorway as the brothers faced each other for the first time since the accident. Cole, Ryan said lightly. You look well. I told you rest would do you good. Cole stood leaning on his cane. You almost made sure I would rest forever. The room went silent. Ryan's smile faltered. What are you talking about? Cole clicked the remote, and the big screen came to life. The footage played rain, headlights, the crash, the access logs. Every detail laid bare. I trusted you, Cole said, voice tight with controlled anger. And you used my pain to build your empire. Ryan laughed nervously. That is ridiculous. Anyone could have. Cole cut him off. Save it. The police already have copies. They are on their way. Quote. For a long moment, Ryan just stared, his mask of confidence cracking. When the sound of sirens echoed faintly from outside, his face turned pale. You would destroy your own family? No, Cole said quietly. You did that yourself. 2 officers stepped inside. Ryan's voice broke into protest, but it was useless. As they led him away, Cole's shoulders slumped. The anger drained out, leaving only exhaustion. Grace approached slowly. It is over now, she said softly. He looked at her, eyes distant. I wish I could say it feels like victory, but all I feel is tired. You stood for the truth, she reminded him. That is what matters. He nodded, then looked down at his cane. When I was lying there after the crash, I thought I was broken beyond repair, but you proved me wrong. You showed me that healing is not about getting back what you lost. It is about finding what was missing. Grace felt tears sting her eyes. And what was missing? He smiled faintly. Someone who believed I could be more than the man the world said I was. The house was quiet again once the police cars left. In the silence, the tension finally broke. Grace helped him sit down, their hands brushing briefly. It was not a grand gesture, not a confession of love, but it was something stronger. It was peace. Outside, the wind carried the smell of rain again. But this time, it was gentle, cleansing, the kind that leaves the air soft and new. Cole closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and whispered, Maybe this is what healing really feels like. The following week passed in silence. The news about Ryan's arrest spread quickly through the business world, but Cole did not answer a single call. He spent his mornings on the terrace, cane in hand, staring at the horizon. The city he once ruled now felt far away, almost irrelevant. Grace kept her routine, still bringing his meals, still writing her careful notes, but now their silence had changed. It was not uncomfortable anymore. It felt like both of them were learning how to breathe again. One afternoon, Grace walked into the study carrying tea. Cole was standing by the window, his reflection outlined by soft sunlight. You have not been back to the company, she said gently. He nodded. They will manage for now. I needed time to think. Quote, about what? About what comes next. For years, I built something that made money but not meaning. When I lost control, I thought I lost everything. But maybe that fall gave me something better. Grace set the tray down. You mean perspective? He smiled faintly. Yes, and courage. I learned that strength is not about control. It is about compassion. They stood in quiet understanding. Outside, the wind moved the trees, their leaves shimmering in late summer light. Later that evening, Cole asked her to walk with him in the garden. It was his first time outside without a therapist. The air was warm, the grass damp beneath their steps. He moved slowly, testing each stride. Grace stayed beside him, steady and patient. At the far end of the path, near the fountain, he stopped. Do you remember the night you tore your skirt? Grace laughed softly. I try not to think about it. It was the most terrifying moment of my life. Quote, "It was the most important night of mine," he said quietly. "That was the moment someone chose my life over their fear. You reminded me that worth is not measured by status, but by what we do when no one is watching." She looked up at him, her eyes bright. "You make it sound like I did something extraordinary. I only did what anyone would have done." He shook his head. "No, Grace. Not everyone would have done what you did. You gave me back more than a heartbeat. You gave me back myself." Quote, a soft breeze moved between them. The world felt still for a moment. Grace could hear the distant hum of cicadas, the steady rhythm of his breath, and her own heart answering it. When they returned inside, Cole paused by the living room wall. Something new hung there, a glass frame containing a strip of dark fabric, carefully pressed and preserved. Beneath it was a small plaque engraved with simple words, "For the night courage mattered more than rules." Grace covered her mouth, her eyes filling with tears. "You kept it?" "I did," he said. "It reminds me that healing does not come from medicine alone. Sometimes it comes from kindness." She smiled through the tears. "Then I guess we both learned the same lesson." He looked at her with quiet sincerity. "Maybe we did." Outside, the last light of the day faded into gold, and for the first time in a long time, the house did not feel like a cage anymore. It felt like home. Autumn arrived quietly, painting the gardens of the Harrington estate in shades of gold and amber. The air was cooler now, the kind that carried the scent of fallen leaves and distant rain. Cole was walking better. His cane was still there, but mostly for balance. Every step reminded him that recovery was not just about the body. It was about learning how to live again. Grace noticed the change in him. He was no longer the man who avoided conversation or hid behind silence. He asked about her mother, about her brother's job, and even helped Mrs. Porter plan meals for the staff. The mansion, once cold and formal, had started to feel almost warm. One morning, as Grace was dusting the shelves in his study, she found a thick envelope with her name on it. Inside were several printed documents and a handwritten note. The note read, "Come to the garden when you finish reading this." She sat down and looked through the papers. They were legal documents and outline for a new charitable foundation, one designed to fund home health care for working families who could not afford it. At the bottom of the last page, her name appeared next to his, marked as co-founder. Her breath caught. She pressed the note to her chest and hurried outside. Cole was waiting by the fountain, the same spot where they had walked weeks before. He was dressed simply, no suit, no pretense. When he saw her coming, he smiled. "Is this real?" she asked, holding up the papers. "As real as the night you saved my life," he said. "You once told me you wanted to make care accessible for everyone. I want to help you make that happen, not as a favor, but as a partnership." Grace's eyes filled with tears. "Cole, I do not know what to say." "Say yes," he answered gently. "We both know the world needs more kindness, and I cannot think of anyone better to lead it with me." She hesitated, emotion tightening her voice. "I am just a maid." He stepped closer, shaking his head. "You were never just anything. You were the one person who saw me as human when no one else did." There was a pause, long enough for the wind to stir the leaves between them. Grace smiled, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Then yes," she said. "Let us do it." Later that evening, she helped him set up a small desk in the sunroom. It became their shared workspace. He handled calls and meetings, while she organized the first list of families who needed support. The project grew faster than either of them expected. Letters of gratitude began arriving, handwritten notes from mothers, veterans, and caregivers who had received help through the fund. Sometimes, when Grace read them aloud, Cole would look at her with quiet awe. "You did this," he would say. "No," she would reply. "We did this." Quote, one night, after a long day of work, she found him sitting alone at the piano again. He looked up when she entered. "I never thanked you properly," he said softly. "You have many times," she replied. "Not for that night. For everything that came after. For giving me a reason to believe again." Grace smiled, walking closer. "You did not need me to believe. You only needed someone to remind you who you were." He nodded slowly. "Maybe. But I still think you were the miracle I did not know I needed." The music started again, soft and unsteady, but full of heart. Outside, the leaves rustled in the wind like a quiet applause, and the house glowed with a light that came not from chandeliers or candles, but from something much rarer, from healing, honesty, and the beginning of love. Winter crept over Dallas with quiet grace. The trees around the Harrington estate stood bare, and soft light poured through the tall windows like pale silk. Inside, the house buzzed with preparation. Tonight, Cole had invited a few close partners and board members for a private dinner, the first time he would face the business world since his brother's arrest. Grace moved through the kitchen, helping Mrs. Porter arrange the last touches. She had been invited too, though she still felt out of place among people who wore suits and carried power like a second skin. But Cole had insisted. "You are part of this story," he told her. "They need to see that." When the guests arrived, the house came alive. Laughter filled the hall, glasses clinked, and polite conversations hummed under the sound of the piano. Cole looked calm, almost regal, but Grace noticed the faint tension in his hand as he rested it on his cane. Dinner began smoothly until one of the older board members raised a glass. "Cole, it is good to see you back on your feet. Rumors aside, we are glad you are well." Cole smiled politely. "Rumors have a way of spreading faster than truth, but the truth always catches up." The man chuckled, unaware of what was coming. Cole pressed a button on a small remote, and the large screen on the wall lit up. Grace froze. It was the same footage: the crash, the security logs, and finally the proof of Ryan's betrayal. Murmurs swept through the table. "I was told to stay silent," Cole said evenly. "But silence protects the wrong people. Tonight I am reclaiming that voice, not for revenge, but for integrity." Grace stood quietly near the doorway, her heart pounding. She knew this was not about humiliation. This was about closure. Cole's voice stayed calm, but each word carried weight. "Some of you worked with Ryan. Some of you believed his version. But tonight, I ask you to judge not by titles or bloodlines, but by actions." The room fell silent. One of the board members spoke up softly. "We stand with you, Cole." He nodded, setting the remote aside. "Thank you, and I want to show you what comes next." He gestured toward Grace. She hesitated, but stepped forward. "This is Grace Miller. She reminded me that leadership means compassion. Together, we founded the Harrington Home Care Initiative, proof that wealth only matters when it is used to heal." The guests turned their attention to her. Grace's hands trembled slightly, but she spoke with quiet strength. "We are building a program that helps families afford medical care at home, because no one should have to choose between healing and survival." Applause broke out. It was soft at first, then steady. Grace saw the pride in Cole's eyes and felt something inside her settle, like the end of a long storm. After the guests left, the house grew quiet again. Cole walked to the window, the city lights flickering beyond the glass. "Do you think they understood?" he asked. Grace joined him. "Yes, you showed them who you really are." He turned toward her, his voice low. "I could not have done any of this without you." She smiled gently. "You would have found your way. I just reminded you which direction to walk." He laughed softly. "Then remind me again tomorrow." Outside, snow began to fall, slow and silent. Inside, their reflections stood side by side in the glass, two people who had faced the worst of storms and somehow built something brighter from the wreckage. That night, as the house grew still, Cole looked at Grace and whispered, "For the first time, this place feels alive again." Grace nodded. "It feels like home." Quote, "Spring returned to Dallas like a quiet promise. The air smelled of rain and magnolia, and the gardens around the Harrington estate burst back to life. For the first time in years, the mansion no longer felt like a fortress. It felt open, warm, and lived in. Inside, sunlight spilled across the living room, where a new painting hung on the wall. Beneath it, framed in glass, was the strip of torn black fabric from Grace's old uniform, the piece she had ripped that stormy night. Beneath it read the small engraved words, "For the night courage mattered more than rules." The home care initiative had grown beyond what either of them imagined. Cole and Grace spent their mornings at the foundation office downtown, reviewing applications and planning new branches. Letters poured in from across the country, families they had helped, patients who could stay home instead of being left alone in hospitals they could not afford. Every note reminded them why they started. One afternoon, after a long meeting, Cole invited Grace for a walk in the garden. The sun hung low, turning the leaves gold. He moved easily now, his cane mostly for habit, not necessity. Grace walked beside him, the wind brushing through her hair. "I have been thinking," he began, his tone gentle. "We built something good here. But I want to build one more thing." She smiled, curious. "Another foundation?" He shook his head, his eyes soft. "A family." Quote, Grace stopped, the words catching her off guard. A family? Yes, he said quietly. Not the kind built on blood or contracts, the kind built on choice. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Inside was a simple ring, no diamonds, just a single silver band. I am not a perfect man, Grace. I have made more mistakes than I can count. But you showed me what it means to live with heart. You turned a house into a home, and a broken man into someone who believes again. Will you stay this time, not as an employee, but as my partner in everything? Her breath trembled. She looked at him, the man who once could not even look another person in the eye, now standing before her with honesty shining in his face. Cole, she whispered. I already stayed long before you asked. He smiled, slipping the ring onto her finger. For a moment, neither spoke. The world seemed to pause, the fountain trickling nearby, the sound of birds, the soft hum of life beginning again. Weeks later, a small wedding took place right there in the garden. There were no reporters, no luxury decorations, just Mrs. Porter, a few friends from the foundation, and Grace's mother, who watched with teary eyes. Cole stood tall, no cane, his hand steady as he held Grace's. When the ceremony ended, he leaned close and whispered, You saved me twice, once from pain, and once from myself. Grace laughed softly. You did the same for me. We both learned that healing goes both ways. Quote, As evening settled, music drifted from the piano inside. The windows glowed with warm light, and the framed piece of fabric shone faintly on the wall, a quiet reminder of where it all began. Grace looked up at Cole and said, Do you think people can really change? He smiled. I think they can heal. And when they do, everything changes. The camera would have panned back, showing the mansion no longer cold but alive, proof that kindness can rebuild what tragedy once destroyed. Voiceover. In a world obsessed with status and wealth, sometimes it takes the heart of someone ordinary to remind us what truly matters: love, compassion, and the courage to do what is right. And with that, their story closed, not with grand gestures or fortune, but with peace, the kind that feels like home.